Hi there, and welcome back to another deep dive video. My name is Shane Isaac, and I'm the CEO and founder of Earth2. You'll have to forgive me for any sudden scratching, as it appears although I was born in Australia and have spent the majority of my life living here, I still forget how strong the sun can be and managed to get myself sunburnt when helping someone out yesterday. So, ouch. Even though the sun didn't feel too strong, the UV rays were extremely strong and I didn't realize it. But we're not here to talk about that. So we've done a deep dive video on rating, how that will work and how droids fit into the picture. But the plot thickens when we look at civilians and how we plan to introduce them and where they fit in as well. As mentioned previously, I have 4 game mechanics that I plan to initially introduce, which are raiding, droids, civilians, and player-to-player contracts. And these deep dive videos that we're doing will provide you with some insight into how they will all work together. And although these 4 game mechanics will work together and complement one another as a standalone group, so they can operate as a standalone group together, raiding and managing your droids to hack, detect, and collect unstable ether from other players' properties is only the initial purpose of these game mechanics. Each one will have further use and utility inside of Earth2 long-term in some of the numerous different core frameworks that we plan to implement on our platform. Let me give you a few examples. So, raiding, for example, is using what could be considered as a light version of our movement and logistic game mechanics. So we're introducing the future of those mechanics via the raiding game mechanic to test it for bigger, long-term goals such as resource transportation for trading and moving other objects around inside of E2v1. These systems will become key parts for the future of our ecosim as we move toward resource generation, replication, building, and so forth. Another example is droids, which are being introduced with the initial ability to raid other properties, but their utility will expand significantly over time as well. Raiding is only the first thing they will be used for. There will be even more utility for them directly inside the raiding mechanics, such as intercepting and some other uses we're keeping secret right now, but long term they might be useful for other things like building, defending, attacking, escorting, searching, scanning, and a number of other things. A player might like to have certain types of droids on hand when traversing E2v1. The list goes on, but I think you get what I mean. Then we have the civilian game mechanics, which we will learn more about today, so I won't share specific details right now, but the civilian game mechanics will also have long-term utility, which starts as part of the raiding concept, and they will move into the ecosim and beyond as well. And finally, we have player-to-player contract game mechanics, which even in their initial version are quite complicated, having a perfect introduction via raiding. However, this is only the beginning, as they will be expanded over time as well to allow for external control over multiple parts of the ecosim on a whole lot of different levels. So you might want a player to control one property or a group of 3 properties or 10 properties or all your properties. You might want them to build, trade, spend, or do many other things directly for your properties or on your properties or with your assets or with your account. So player-to-player contract for raiding will allow us to introduce all of that, and I'll make another video later talking about it because it is quite in-depth and it will cover a lot of things, as I said, even for the raiding aspect of player-to-player contracts. Anyway, I just wanted to point out these 4 game mechanics we're working to design and implement now. They are not the end of the line, they are in fact the beginning of the line, and each one leads into future purpose and utility inside of Earth2. Now, although the historic timeline of Earth2 is in the here and now, meaning today on Earth 1 is also the same day, month, and year inside of Earth 2. So it's not set in like the future or the past per se. And although we have many different plans for Earth 2 as a platform, for example, to act as an intermediary between Web 2 and Web 3, between 2D and 3D, between what we know today and what will become tomorrow, to support things like e-commerce and social media, portals to other gaming experiences, and even potentially other metaverse platforms. So when all of that is on the table, and while that is all exciting enough, I personally don't see any reason why we can't build on top of it and have a storyline in the background to make the builds of Earth 2 real and create like a connection between the digital assets inside of Earth 2 and make the gameplay element of Earth 2 that much more interesting and immersive. Therefore, instead of simply saying, here, you can now build civilians, we want to tell and set a storyline that will evolve over time. So before I jump into the UI UX walkthrough for civilians, like I did with the droids background, the story and the lore of the ethereal droids and the meta sprites, let me share the story with you so far and how civilians made their way into Earth 2. Quick point. Our concept art team desperately wanted to create visuals for this background story, but unfortunately they had another or many other higher priorities, and I'd prefer them to be focusing on a backlog of requirements directly related to the end product of phase 2.5 and the end product of the rating and civilians and what have you, all of that stuff, opposed to spending time on working on visuals that would be used solely for marketing and promotional purposes. So maybe they will create something later on for this story, but for now you'll just have to listen to me explain it. But let's have a look at the background story for civilians on Earth 2. And to give you guys an idea, I guess we could share some of the images of civilians while we're going through part of this to give you guys a bit of a sneak peek at some of the characters our game design team and our concept art team came up with working together so far. So, civilians. Let's begin the background story. When the pioneers, also known as the first landowners, from Earth 1 started to operate the first mentars, strange signals were caught during inter-networked tethering communication between other mentars. At first, it seemed to be some kind of frequency interference or fault in the tethering process, but many doubted the possibility of the seemingly perfect mentars being faulty in this way. After all, they were the only piece of pre-existing technology pioneers had been able to discover on Earth 2 so far, and many thought of them as a direct gift of perfection from the creators themselves. These strange signals became amplified when detecting and collecting ether. Upon further investigation of the signal, findings showed that what was first thought to be a rogue radio signal turned out to be a different kind of electromagnetic microwave operating on a narrow beam but modified somehow and unlike anything that they had ever seen before. It seems that the mentars already had this built-in ability to intercept these transmissions, which appeared to be originating from an unknown place within the metaverse. The content of the signals intercepted by the mentars revealed some insights into their possible origins. When pioneers discovered the mentars' output data from the transmission resembled strands of DNA. Though there were some similarities with the DNA of the pioneers, there were also other clear abnormalities. Following this discovery, the pioneers soon identified several different variations of the DNA strands, each being clearly distinguishable from one another. All evidence suggested there was a clear connection between the signal and ether, especially where high concentrated amounts of ether existed. The pioneers began conducting various experiments, attempting to combine the data DNA strands with captured ether. The unforeseeable reaction was instantaneous. Virtual life forms such as trees and plants seemed to rejuvenate when in direct proximity of the experimentation area. The pioneers interpreted this as a promising sign for the new types of photosynthesis of vegetation inside this new virtual world. But one pioneer remained unconvinced that this was the only use of the new discovery, and began to conduct a range of unconventional experiments, including one which redirected the transmission data directly into the core processor of a holoprojector, technology this pioneer claimed to have never used, as they believed holoprojections were useless. When the pioneer looked at the visual that began forming during the experiment, further panic arose when an otherworldly life form appeared in the holoprojection itself. The appearance of the life form was unfamiliar, and although it seemed passive and harmless, the vision of this foreign being drove the pioneer away to the verge of insanity, claiming alien races were hidden in the signal and were coming to sabotage and steal the land that he rightfully owned. When others refused to listen, this pioneer, the first of those who became the unnamed, sold his land to the other pioneers and forever cursed Earth 2 and its existence, although he had greatly profited in the sales of his land. But one pioneer's loss is another pioneer's gain, and others vowed to be patient and humble and continued forth. This discovery led the pioneers to the beginning of synthesizing life forms inside of Earth 2. Some speculated that these advanced electromagnetic microwaves were coming from other worlds inside the metaverse that had learned about the creation of Earth 2 and were attempting to inhabit it. It appeared as though they lacked the technology or power to travel directly to Earth 2 in their physical form. Irrespective of what some thought, the pioneers had arrived first and had begun their conquest for dominance over this new virtual planet. And as humans tend to do, they started looking for ways to exploit the DNA strands from the mysterious transmissions with the hope of creating an efficient labor force for their properties, as the vision seen by the first of the unnamed was indeed an otherworldly life form. Through much trial and error, the pioneers learned that there was much they did not yet know about the Mentor and how it operated. The Mentor had clearly detected this transmission and therefore may hold the key on what should be done with the data. This avenue led them to discover a new chamber within the Mentor, which provided some kind of synthesizing technology, and that could relay the intercepted microwave transmission into this chamber while infusing it with just the right amount of ether from the storage banks. The result was both incredible and alarming. Within this new synthesizing chamber, something started to grow. First as an embryo and then larger. It was in fact becoming a life form. Over time it grew to form into a full being, some similar in appearance to humans and others very different. There was an instant bond with the Mentor, and the first words from the civilian were duly noted. As Ra is my witness, I entered this realm to serve. So the age of civilians had begun. Though their first words suggested otherwise, synthesized civilians seemed to show no recollection of their origins or their purpose on Earth 2. But some pioneers felt civilians should be monitored closely, as they believe Earth 2 could be a target of these otherworldly factions due to its abundance of life, power, and resources. Ether and essence have the ability to, amongst other things, sustain life and power. And although there is inconclusive evidence to say for sure why the DNA of the factions are being transmitted toward Earth 2, many feel the purpose is to be closer to the magic ether and essence provides to the metaverse, along with the jewels that amplify them, as the control of ether and essence brings ultimate power. All reports suggest that civilians within Earth 2 are loyal to players and pioneers and play a key role in the management or improvement of a vast array of functionalities. They are capable of working at different places and performing different tasks, and together they can achieve goals that may require one or many of the same skill set. Civilians and dwellers seem to be members of varying factions from across the metaverse. These factions have their own specific appearances, cultures, and beliefs, which may prevent them from getting along with one another. But for now, it seems that they are oblivious to what these are, and the absence of any specific memories tend to allow them to perfectly coexist together with one another. It has been established that civilians are quite intelligent beings, having the capacity to learn new skills and obtain higher knowledge. They are suitable to be put to work in a variety of ways and occupations. However, their intelligence may pose a risk which is yet unknown. If they can learn, can they also forget? Or might they use their newfound knowledge and skills to pursue ulterior motives? Or perhaps this is only a human trait, and civilians, when treated well, will forever remain loyal. They do, however, exhibit signs of needs, behaviors, and even preferences to different types of tasks and vocations. Though much is still unknown about them, civilians are of great assistance to a pioneer, providing help to run their properties, control their fleets, report information, unlock abilities, and much more that will be discovered in the future. In the foreseeable future, it seems it is much better to be walking with your own civilians than without. I hope that provides you all with an interesting introduction to civilians. I'm sure more of their stories and backgrounds will be slowly discovered over time inside of Earth 2. Now that you understand all there is to know about civilians up until this point in time, let's look at how they can be synthesized and utilized and how their introduction fits into the raiding mechanics. So let's jump into the UI/UX walkthrough and look at how it's going to operate in its initial first iteration. Civilians give players the opportunity to automate some of the tasks that come with land ownership. Whether you have a small or large account, you'll be able to appreciate what a civilian can do for you. Since civilians have the ability to unlock new functionalities, a civilian management page is used to keep all the new interactions in one spot. The civilian management page is similar to that of the droid management page. Players are given the option to alternate between viewing civilians individually as a list or grouped together by the property the civilian belongs to. As you can see on this screen, we don't have any civilians because we also don't have any properties. So let's switch to a view that has some properties. In the property list, each card will display the property's name, the property's location, the operator for the property, but that's coming later with player-to-player contracts, the population, the number of civilians, and the number of droids that are on the property. Like when droids are being built or relocated, if there are civilians currently being synthesized on a property, a progress bar and the number of synthesizing civilians will be displayed beneath the current population number. When a property is selected, a list of civilians living on the property will be displayed. In this sample interface, this particular property has a population of 0, so no civilians are listed. When this happens, the player can choose to synthesize civilians. At the moment, players can synthesize a maximum of 5 civilians for any property that has 4 or more tiles, with each civilian having their own unique occupation. Though bear in mind, these numbers may change. Each occupation will unlock a certain raid-related functionality or perk, although keep in mind that in the future the capabilities of a civilian will extend far beyond just raids, as more features are released over time. For now, occupations will be assigned to a civilian based on the order in which they are synthesized. As we can see in this example interface, players can select the number of civilians they wish to synthesize. The mentor requires Ether to execute such a process and will only be able to synthesize 1 civilian at a time. Once the desired number of civilians has been chosen, the player can then select this button to begin synthesizing their civilians. As you can see in this UI mockup, the cost is suggesting 5 Ether per civilian. However, as mentioned in previous videos, the designs that we're showing do not always have the precise figure that will eventually be used. Once the mock-up designs are completed, game designs continue to do many calculations and balancing. So at the moment, I can let you know that the cost per civilian is going to be closer to around about 20 ether each. Once the player taps the button to synthesize their civilians, the player will be met with a confirmation page allowing them to either initiate or cancel the synthesis of their civilians. If the player confirms the cost and time to synthesize the specified number of civilians, the mentor will begin using intercepted electromagnetic wave transmissions to feed into the synthesizing chamber with the correct amount of ether and then begin synthesizing its first civilian. The current civilian being synthesized will have a progress bar indicating how much longer the process will take. If we take a look at the civilian checklist, we can also see that the civilian being synthesized will be checked off with a gray tick. When a civilian on the list is marked as pending, this means that it has already been queued but the process has not yet begun. Once that specific civilian has been fully synthesized, the tick will become aqua, and the synthesized civilian and their abilities will be immediately accessible. Now that we've synthesized our civilians, let's take a look at how we can manage them. Players will first have to select a civilian from their list of synthesized civilians. Each civilian card will display the civilian's profile, which includes the gender, the name, the occupation, the rarity, the faction, and the ability. Once a civilian is selected, the player will be able to alternate between viewing the general info and accessing their ability menu. In the civilian's general info, the player will be presented with a full body image of the civilian and the civilian's specifications, including a brief description of their job title and their location, and in the civilian's ability menu, players can view and manage their civilian's occupational abilities. Just a note that the screen we're showing here is just a holder graphic that we created. The actual image will contain the specific civilian that you have in this job on this property at that time. Let's take a look at our first synthesized civilian, the data analyst. A data analyst is responsible for unlocking and providing insights, a feature that we have explored in a previous video. Insights are very handy when it comes to strategic rating, as it reveals detailed rating statistics of your properties and droids and can help you make decisions on what properties to raid and which droids to send. As you can see here, because we have a civilian, a data analyst, on this given property, we now have the ability to unlock insights for the property itself and the droids. Our second civilian is the droid technician who, knowing all there is to know about droids, will be able to charge the player's droids when they are idle. This means the droids tethered to that property will no longer need to be manually charged by the player. Instead, you can think of them as being on auto charge. The time until a droid is fully charged will also be displayed above the droid's power stats. Our next civilian is the ether dispenser, who can automatically dispense the ether of droids tethered to that property. The player has full control of the auto-dispensing system and can instruct the ether dispenser to dispense the droid's ether storage if it contains any amount of ether, or to only dispense if the droid's ether storage is completely full. If a player does not wish for the droid to automatically dispense ether, the player may simply set the auto control to off. Our fourth civilian is the raid commander. This civilian will allow the player to set auto raids to a specific property via the raid menu. To elaborate on what auto raiding is, auto raiding enables players to assign a droid on their property to repeatedly raid a selected property indefinitely. This is a handy feature that allows players to actively raid on a daily basis without the need to manually do so. Consistently raiding a property multiple times could also prove to be a valuable source of insight regarding certain raid patterns. Finally, The fifth civilian a player can synthesize on their property is the droid pilot. This civilian will be able to directly control and fly droids that you own for very specific missions. These missions will be added in the future, but the player still may opt to build this civilian in advance so they have one for when the pilot civilian's abilities are released. So, to start with, there will be 3 different factions: the Space Force faction, the Rebel Force faction, and the faction of the ancient Egyptian gods. The order the civilians are synthesized in will initially remain the same for each property, such as the data analyst may always be first, followed by the droid technician, the ether dispenser, the raid commander, and the droid pilot. There will be different levels of rarities to receive civilian specialists from each faction type. For example, an ether dispenser from the Space Force faction might be common when it is rarer to synthesize an ether dispenser from the Rebel Force faction or the ancient Egyptian god faction. We have already designed and continue to design more factions that are currently kept secret but will be released over time. For now, let's do a quick recap on what each specialist civilian can do and what that civilian currently looks like for each one of the initial 3 factions. When the data analyst is synthesized, the mentor provides them with an ability to control various aspects of the mentor, specifically to open insights and statistics. The civilian will explore, interpret, and present the player with the ever-changing property and droid raid statistics, insights of a certain raid-related findings and trends for any mentor it is dwelling in. It is likely in the future that data analysts will be able to model and visualize data sets in areas outside of raiding as well. Having a data analyst will provide essential planning and determining certain raid strategies and decisions. Without this civilian, the player will have no vision across such important data, which will be a massive loss in strategy. The droid technician constantly charges the player's idle droids. They know about the technical inner workings of the droid and how Essence can keep it charged without an external power cell at this point in time. It is thought that when a droid technician is synthesized, the mentor provides them with this additional knowledge about ethereal droids and their power requirements. Without a droid technician, the player will find themselves extra busy having to manually identify and command their droids to be recharged when the power cell level is under 100%. The ether dispenser knows a great deal about ether. It is thought that when they are being synthesized, the mentor gives them additional knowledge, so they know how to handle the life power force of ether in all these different situations. The civilian will automatically dispense the rated ether carried by each droid, so when a droid returns to your property after a successful raid, your ether dispenser will immediately evaluate and be on hand to ensure that that ether is deposited into your ether storage bank. And without an ether dispenser, I guess the player would have to locate droids which are storing ether successfully from raids, and then dispense the ether themselves, which obviously would be quite time consuming. The raid commander allows players to set the droids to auto-raid a certain property. When the raid commander is being synthesized, the mentor provides the civilian with the ability to pre-program droids which are tethered to the mentor the raid commander is residing in at the time. Droids set to auto-raid will continue to raid the target property for an indefinite period of time, whenever they are available to do so, so whenever they have charge. Without a raid commander, the player will need to deploy their droids to retarget a property manually. Little is known about the droid pilot just yet, but it seems the mentor provides them with some kind of key to operate a single droid from the comfort of a flight simulator station which is located inside the mentor. It may be that when more is learned, the droid pilot will be able to control a single droid at one time for a special mission to do things a droid would not normally be programmed to do. In the not-so-distant future, not only do we expect new types of factions to start sending their signals to Earth in a hope to have their DNA fused with ether in a synthesis chamber, but it seems the Mentor also receives new types of DNA data for existing factions as well. For example, recently, 2 new kinds of signals have been intercepted but are not yet synthesizable. So these 2 are the Jewel Specialist, which seems to have some kind of special knowledge and abilities for crafting jewels, possibly in more effective ways that may even require less essence, and the Ranger, which can live directly off virtual land on a property inside of Earth 2, ranging over that property to discover things that periodically spawn on that property. So there are a couple of teasers for now. Well, I hope you liked the introduction of the civilians for Earth 2. The implementation for civilians will come after the raiding and droids mechanics are deployed and online. There is still some remaining QA before we deploy raiding even to stage 2. As mentioned, there was some feature creep, and you can see how detailed the first iteration will be based on the deep dive video that we did the other week talking about the raiding mechanics, the raiding and droid mechanics. But I am pushing hard and hoping we can get it onto stage 2 soon and get some initial feedback from the amazing people in the Earth 2 community who often help us check features on stage 2 before they go out live. I may release the video about player-to-player contracts at a later date. It is very detailed and quite complex, so I'll probably release that video a few weeks before player-to-player contracts go live, so it's fresher in everybody's mind. The contract system will introduce the first type of free-to-play inside of Earth 2 and will allow free-to-play players to control almost all of the raiding features inside one or more of another player's properties. Finally, this is something I may tweet about, but if you have a webcam, we'd love to capture your reaction to the different parts of the upcoming E2v1 progress video we're going to drop over the next few days. I had originally been holding this footage in order to release it when the Essence token officially launched, as I do believe it would have had quite an impressive impact to many looking to purchase the token. But considering that now maybe some months away, I have officially decided to release a big part, not all, but a big part of the footage earlier, during the 2nd anniversary birthday month, to give those patient supporters in the Earth 2 community a glimpse of the progress and a vision of what we have been building and what is to come. So if you have a webcam, please consider recording yourself when you watch the video and send it to us so we can share in the reactions to various parts of the footage in the video we're going to drop. I hope you guys enjoyed that video about the progress of E2v1 coming soon, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video about civilians. And until next time, take care, keep safe, and goodbye.